Maybe it's this uploading thing that happens to be the signal. I'm going to take it as a signal, at least. Good morning. Happy Monday,
What's
everybody.
up, everyone?
Welcome to Let's Build HubSpot Mapping with
Yeah.
Bryan Ossa. How you doing, Bryan?
Good morning, everyone. Doing great this lovely Monday morning, and yeah, really excited to be talking about a topic that most people are not the most comfortable with, and that's money, and specifically pricing strategies and how to build that out for yourself. And yeah, Chris, I know you mentioned like as we were getting in this call, you had thoughts on that, and so before we even start breaking it down in categories, like I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, it's just, man, pricing strategies and understanding, actually like a strategic way to
Hmm.
apply pricing, to what you're offering. It can be very easy to think about it from a cost based only
Hmm.
perspective, which, tends to push us towards hourly and billable time, and everything is focused around that versus value based, right?
Hmm.
I think at the top, that's where I see, the first differentiation. And the problem is, like, if you start from cost, in my experience, and if that's what everybody used to, if that's what everybody is used to,
Hmm.
it is so hard to get over to value based. Like,
Oh yeah.
because we've built systems, we've built processes, we built time tracking, that almost all of it, and this is the magic of if we can get to value based,
Hmm.
just none of that stuff matters anymore. So you have to deal with change. Sometimes that's people's jobs specifically
Hmm.
to like track all that stuff and maintain it and kind of do all the math behind the scenes.
Hmm.
But all of that is administrative, overhead. And at the end of the day, do we even need to be doing that stuff? Like,
Yeah.
so that's kind of where I approach it from. Big, huge advocate of value based, you
Hmm.
know, approaches. I know it doesn't make sense in every case, but I think we can walk through some examples here
Oh yeah.
that can help just start the conversation. I think that's like you and I were saying, like we just need to start having some conversations about this stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I wholly agree with you, and I think like there's a big part of it that's just like understanding just the different pricing models because to your point, there's a lot of you go immediately into like cost plus pricing because that's what you're used to. Like you work at a 9 to 5 job for a lot of times before you're even starting out consulting, and your experience there is you're paid hourly or you're paid salary. Both of those are like the hourly is very much just cost plus. You can argue that a salary is value based, but given how the salary market changes so dynamically, and you can look at one role you can look at a single role across different industries that can be anywhere from like 80 grand a year to like 250 grand a year, and it's hard to make that argument because it's so variable. And so like I know there's four main categories of pricing that a lot of folks kind of dive into, five in my mind, but we'll kind of get to that shortly. And having conversation, I think chatting about them, giving a brief definition, and then diving into examples will be a good thing. Uh, what
Yeah.
what do you think? Yeah,
Yeah. Let's dive in.
let's do it. Yeah, so I'll just kind of go on a mini monologue real quick, just kind of giving the lowdown, and we can go into it. But essentially, the four primary ones that most folks are familiar with: you have cost plus pricing, competition based, time based, and value based. And honestly, like cost plus is what you think of when you're at a retail establishment. It's this item costs X, you want to sell it at Y, and your price margin is the gap between. Competitions, what you see primarily like e-commerce companies or gas stations, where you're trying to price yourself around what the competition's doing so that you can have a very similar kind of income level, which may or may not work depending on what you're doing. Time based, this is everything we've been talking about. It's directly like, what is your time worth in an hourly ratio, and you just build it there. There's another variant of it that's also very popular, that is completely different in that prices go up or down depending on the season. So look at tickets and traveling and entertainment venues. That falls into that category a lot. And then everything that we want to be getting on today is value-based pricing, which is, in my mind, your mind, just collectively, it's like it's probably the best way to position yourself. And in order to get to that is where I like coming to that fifth category of just hybrid pricing, which is kind of a combination of all of them together, where you kind of have like a value-based pricing line that you set for, and then you kind of interweave aspects of the other resources. No, it's a lot.
Yeah.
No, it's a lot of information to kind of process, and again, like we're talking money. It's not comfortable. No one likes talking money, especially in a social dynamic, let alone here on a cast that's usually about, hey, how do I help?
Well, this is usually the reason why you want to HubSpot,
Right.
is that we're building revenue. And I think our goal is just, um, especially in terms of like just getting like the hard part of transitioning to value based is that you don't fully understand the value you provide already,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm trying to pull up a diagram because I like to start here.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't always work the way I want to,
It
but it's
never
like
does.
if we're not even thinking about how we provide value in that context, which
Mm-hmm.
is what kind of value is the customer receiving, is the people that we're trying to help, what how did they define the value,
Yeah.
right? And if we're not even thinking about that, then all we can think about is the effort and time and costs that we're putting in to create the product or the
Yep.
experience. And even
Yeah.
that, like, this is why I try to get people to think about the experience as the product. Because once it goes to that level,
Mm-hmm.
now you can actually start to define some value.
Yep.
And this is where, like in 2018, 2019, started working with Troy Robertson at Metal Analysis Group and the XRF company. And he kind of helped me to understand, uh, you hear these words like platform, platform offerings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, at least in SaaS, it's if you call yourself a platform, you know, we think that you can do like maybe 80, 90+% of what is needed,
To run your business.
for
Yeah.
your business, right?
Right.
Well, the same thing is true in physical goods. Like if you can create the one-stop shop, right, is where we started approaching this from. And what's interesting is you inherently know that as a salesperson, right? So we build
Mm-hmm.
out all these packages, or we do all these things during the process that could be broken out as value, right? So as I start to talk about it, right, and just we break out all the things, and this is where like just look to other businesses, and it can be super helpful to look across markets, look into other spaces,
And that's where
because
the whole concept of the hybrid model comes in, because again, you're building your value. Like there's a large degree of information you can get based off of what your competition is doing.
right. So once we start to break these things out into revenue streams, right? Consulting, right, is a huge, it's almost always an opportunity for a business,
Mm-hmm.
but they do it for free during the sales process because the
Of
goal
course.
everybody's measured on selling the thing. This is where the difference between product and experience is huge, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they should be different. But when you, because also you can do consulting clearly without them buying the product, and you're
Mm-hmm.
still giving them value. How much is that worth? to that person, right? So there's stuff you do before the sale, there's stuff you do after the sale. And even if you want to look at this from a cost, right? It's crazy that, and I've heard this recently, like the cost plus or the time based only applies to what happens after the sale, almost always, right?
I
But how much
I would
work?
I would agree and disagree with you there because it's a lot of what's done, but also like after the sale too. Like you keep in mind like what that finished product is because if it take for example a website. Company's never had a website before. It takes you what 12 hours to build it, going back and forth with the client. But that website builds and takes their monthly revenue from 4,000 a month to 7,000 a month. It's like you, yes, until a certain threshold, everything you're talking about for that time base pretty much leans into, and then it's almost like a linear progression model where you kind of get up into a certain plateau and then it shifts to an exponential climb, and that's kind of the way you got to look at the time versus value base. It's just like most of the pricing models are very linear or very step model versus value kind of tends to be a lot more parabolic and exponential, which is again what you got to determine is your output to the client. And something
Right.
that you mentioned a few minutes ago that I think is extremely important is what the client's perceived value is of you, not the other way around, because it's really easy to think that you're like what you're putting out is absolutely incredible, or honestly to the contrary, more often than not people think that they underplay the value of their offering. And then you get to a client aspect and you're like, okay, well, yeah, I'll be your director, essentially director of operations, and I can do that for $1,500 a month. And then you do a little bit of research and realize, oh, I shot myself in the foot. I probably could have tripled that number, and it still would have been okay for the client, and that would have provided that because you're providing them with that much value.
Right. And it's, um, yeah, like in general, like when you're good at marketing and sales, like you're providing value from the first touch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but sometimes, you might oftentimes you're not getting the return on that
Mm-hmm.
value, right? Because I like to show these three as an
Mm-hmm.
example. So let's say there's consumables, and this is meant to be like it's transactional. Like the
Mm-hmm.
value is actually how easy and convenient is this transaction, right? It should not be consultative, right? I'm looking for low dollar, like in and out as fast as possible, right? And then we have consulting, um, where it's, hey, we're just having a conversation and, asking the right questions, talking about what could be, what should be, but there's no real like tangible thing. It's straight time. And this is where we get to, you know, if this were happening after you were already a customer,
Mm-hmm.
we would certainly be charging you for it, like
Mm-hmm.
per hour. But since it's happening in association with maybe business unit one, like you get it for free,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm not saying like I'm saying like understand that is a part of the value that you're providing, and know that since it's okay to choose to provide that for free at some point to help,
Find the balance
build
and
the
the threshold.
relationship, right?
Yeah.
But know that it's a part of the value. Like this is where I often push back of like if it's $0, it has no value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is it's a common sentiment. Um, in some case applicable, in some cases not, but that's where we do so much to try and get the sale of the thing, right? If we just kind of break that process down and understand how much value is being provided, that starts to open the door to like, hey, maybe we can price this, more effectively to create more margin, to, put a lot less pressure on the system as a whole. We can start to build team commission structures because the whole team is providing value to try to get the sale, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just starting from this place of, hey, these motions are different. And when we talk about, e-commerce and stuff, like the consumables thing right? Even things like this are getting missed. Like, okay, HubSpot quote record might exist over here. It should not exist over here. It's an online store purchase transaction. And just because we don't do it like that, we are costing ourselves more when the customer expectation is that they want to just check out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're forcing them through this quoting process. So we're costing ourselves more money, right? The conversion rate's going to go down. So now we think, oh, maybe that's not a viable revenue stream, or we shouldn't focus on that, or like all these, we're
Instead of
not, the
making an
margins
adjustment
aren't
to the
there,
process itself.
right?
Right.
And since the margins aren't there, we don't pursue it when it could be some of the best margins if we just approach it like as far as transactional value versus engagement value or experiential value, right? And just starting here, like if you don't start from this perspective, it's going to be very challenging for you to get to value based, I think, because you got to give yourselves credit and a little bit of permission to say, hey, we're doing more than just, you know, transacting on a daily basis. Our team is spending time on calls, on solutioning, on all these things that we're doing so that they will buy HubSpot, right? But when we're going as far as to help them figure out, all their processes and help them change, and
Mm-hmm.
this is where there's a huge, you can see the agencies, that have figured this out already.
Mm-hmm.
That's why their price tag is where it is,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're helping you change and modernize your business,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's much more than the value of HubSpot as a platform, much
Right.
more than a simple, get in, get out onboarding process, right?
Right. And that brings us right back to combination of one, just knowing your audience and doing it from their perspective, because again, it's way too easy to do this from your perspective and what you think it should be, and then you pigeonhole yourself into thinking, okay, this is the way I'm going to charge, this is the way that I'm going to do the process, and if you find that that's not working, you'll abandon it. Again, to your point, I'm just re-emphasizing that. And so you need to have some flexibility and be willing to adapt a little bit and run experiments with different models. And honestly, when you're trying to figure out what this looks like, the best thing to do is like approach old clients who you've already completed projects with. And like I've encouraged folks to do this in different aspects of just like it's really simple. You just get on a 10-minute conversation with a previous client and you just ask, based off of what you hired me to do, did I deliver it? Yes or no? To what degree above or below? And do you think I underpriced or overpriced? And just get the genuine feedback from them. Because in all honesty, like if you have a good relationship with a person, they'll be completely straight with you. And if if they're just like, yeah, everything was great, and I paid like 8 grand for insert project here, and man, I'm now banking 20,000 more per month. Like I way underpaid you. Like this is huge. At the time, it probably would have felt like a lot. Like in hindsight, it was hugely undervalued. That's very relevant and important information that you could then apply directly into things. And honestly, if you're scared of doing that with a previous client, like it's going to sound silly, but do this on like Facebook Marketplace or OfferUp or Craigslist. Like if you find something, you're like, oh, I'm buying this secondhand. You just buy it, and then you can tell, or you're selling it. You just get feedback from the person who you're buying it from, the person you're selling it to, and that's helpful information to understand in an indirect way how you're positioning everything for your pricing. And that's huge. That's all valuable information because it's all data. And that data is hugely informative of everything that you're trying to do.
Yeah. And like if you don't ask them, they're not going to tell you when things are great generally.
No.
But that's some of the most important pieces of data, because those are the things that
Mm-hmm.
you can tie into value,
Mm-hmm.
based pricing often. And they're going to tell you in a myriad of different ways. And the only way to get good at understanding that kind of qualitative data is by doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having people keying in on, like, as soon as they talk about, like, we talk about surprise and delight. They have ways of telling you that, and it might be, oh, this part of the process was, I wasn't expecting that, but you can
Mm-hmm.
tell it's a very positive tone that they're using. You can tell when it's negative
Mm-hmm.
too, right? And then it turns into, okay, if we made that process better or we remove that friction point, understanding the value of that, was it really that painful for
Mm-hmm.
them? Because sometimes it's like, that was an annoying part, or it
It's a
took me
quick
an
one.
extra day
Yeah.
to get this thing done and that sucked,
Mm-hmm.
right? And just getting these viewpoints, getting outside of your business and of your
Mm-hmm.
process is so important here, um, because they will tell you, that's step one. Like, they will tell you exactly what they need, exactly what it means to them in their day to day. And then the second piece is really applying that, like, to the business,
Mm-hmm.
like trusting them, right? It doesn't have to be word for word, like, okay, they told us to do this, so we're going to do this. But it's understanding. We've had 10 interviews. Everybody highlights this spot, right, of friction. So we want to remove that point of friction, right? But that's going to cost the business money, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if these people want it, they said they might be willing to pay more, like, for
Mm-hmm.
a different, execution of it. Um, you all of a sudden, now it makes sense to change the process, where we might not have changed the process without that kind of viewpoint,
Mm-hmm.
right? So talking to the customers, again, like almost every strategy, like, please do that. Please talk to some customers, like,
Mm-hmm.
get their point of view. It's huge.
Exactly. And there's something that's pretty important and powerful there that you said that I want to highlight on too, and that's just getting that continued feedback from them. And that's where the value of something like HubSpot comes into play, because there's customer satisfaction and CSAT surveys that are just built right into Service Hub. And even if you're not using that directly within HubSpot, which is completely fine, that is an easy, quick, and automated way that you can set up just to get that feedback from your clients at these different points in time. And you use that information again to further inform how you do all these things in the future. Because if you're starting to see a trend over, again, to your point, where 10 out of 12 of these people on your team are saying that this thing was frustrating and maddening, maybe you should change that. Or if you're getting oh yes, this was so easy, like too easy, and there's kind of a concern about how simple it was, that might be something worth investigating too, because I mean, there there's nothing wrong with making a process or an experience easy, but if it's too easy, maybe you're missing something. And you're not going to know that until you start getting this information and having those conversations.
Yeah. And that's like, even if you haven't, so some people might be familiar with the phrase listening post, right? Creating these
Mm-hmm.
points in the digital space where you can be listening to feedback, be listening for feedback, be getting feedback, creating this feedback loop. If those don't exist, your people are the only listening post, right? And we're not, what we're doing when we talk about CSAT and these different tools that can be set up, since they're set up, it doesn't mean everybody's going to do it. And it's going to be like, okay, now we've got this in place. We'll know everything we need to know about
Mm-hmm.
feedback. It's just creating these different avenues to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's less pressure on the one avenue coming through your customer facing team,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we can have better conversations there. And just this feedback loop, this is what I love about HubSpot themselves. Like they're great at kind of receiving feedback, understanding
Mm-hmm.
it, sometimes taking action, sometimes it builds into, something bigger,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the only way they can move so fast, as they do. And just creating those spaces, right? That's one level. But then the other level is if there's kind of along the track of like, you've got to make changes sometimes because your internal team is telling you how crappy the process is. Like and I was drawn back to like the self-service portal concept, that I implemented at the last role. And,
Mm-hmm.
but also my first customer that I did it for as a consultant, he immediately understood, right? Yes, this is solving an internal friction point where we don't want to be answering calls and emails about order status constantly.
Mm-hmm.
But now once we make it available, we're tying that right into the sales process, and that this is a value that we're providing, this visibility after you become a customer that you're not going to get from anywhere else. So
Exactly.
one, it's a value prop to build into the sales process. But two, that experience, if it is truly differentiated, people will pay for that. Like that will make the pricing conversations a lot easier, and you develop all these ways to not get like cornered into a price is everything
Mm-hmm.
conversation.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And again, not like your point, like that's a fantastic example of just you did the work for that first client, and then you got the feedback from the client, and then that directly informs the experience. And I think we're just like, at least I know that I am just starting to give different examples of different approaches of saying the same thing, of just like run an experiment, like come up with a hypothesis, whatever you might think the pricing model makes sense is for you, and do some research about that, run it, see what the reception is, and then make adjustments accordingly. Don't necessarily just start doing the scatter approach and just see what sticks, because I guarantee you the thing that's going to stick is probably going to be the least viable option for you long term. Yes, it may solve something in the short term, but chances are that that's going to be in this time based model that everyone is used to. But that time based model again starts restricting you in that if you're not working, you're not getting paid 100% of the time, and that becomes extremely challenging if you ever want to go on a holiday or pick up more clients or even just get sick. Like like these simple things that are directly tied into this traditional method of doing business and bringing in your income is you need to work in order to bring in money, which yes, that is important, but that's the translation factor over to value based, and that you still need to do that, but it becomes more tied to your output, not your time. And that output is ultimately something that makes much more of a difference than your time in the grand scheme of things, period.
Yeah. And as you talk about that, it's like this is the difference between scale and not scale, right? Like if
Mm-hmm.
you're stuck in I'll say cost plus and um and time based, you're 100% restricted to people, like to headcount in the time based, model,
Probably just yourself too.
right? And if it's cost plus, you're restricted to like those tangible costs that likely do not scale, like that. And so much pressure gets put on these supplier relationships because, okay, how many are you going to buy? 100, 1,000,
Mm-hmm.
or 100,000. I can get you a better price at 100. And we try to build all these systems to kind of make that kind of buy, worth it, all
Mm-hmm.
because we need to make it work in this cost plus model of
Mm-hmm.
how we get paid for the work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
And once you flip the switch to value, there's really infinite scalability almost, because figuring out all the ways that you provide value, it it just allows this other level of innovation that is not possible when you're restricted to headcount and supply chain, right?
Yeah.
And it's all about
That,
the delivery, it's all about the experience, and there's lots of blue ocean there in most
mm-hmm.
spaces to provide new experiences that people will pay for.
And you can do that still by maintaining a time-based model internally. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like that actually works really well. And that's what, like I've consulted with a variety of agencies and pushed to shift to like a points-based pricing model, which is essentially like you are charging based off of your value, but you want to reconcile how much time it takes you as well as what your cost margin is. And so all a points menu is pretty much giving you a value based model based off of your time. And then you can scale that up or down using a variety of equations, which again, if you have questions about, more than happy to entertain them. And you drill into that and you're able to build something that is actually really, really sustainable and really scalable. And I could I cannot advocate for that model enough because it truly is a combination of everything in all honesty, and that that combination is going to be what helps you succeed, because picking off and sticking with one specific model while we've been preaching this whole time about how amazing value based is, sometimes that just may not work. And to your point, Chris, like when you have those clients which is like, hey look, I just want like 3 or 4 hours a month to just kind of get a little bit of feedback from you. If you're throwing in a value based pricing model, like yeah, well that'll be $1,000. For some people that may work, and if you're established, that'll probably work. But while you're getting started, that's probably going to be much harder to do.
Yes.
And so that's why I encourage the embracing of the hybrid model, where you're using a little bit of everything where and how you need it, because that allows for you to be flexible and ensures that while you're working towards value based pricing, you don't necessarily get stuck in the model of working based off of your time,
Yeah.
because that's the whole point of this is scale. And if you're putting yourself in a position where you can't scale, that's just doing yourself and honestly your client too a disservice, because then you're both looking at this in concepts of time, not output. And ultimately, you're not being hired to put your time. You're being hired to provide them value. So you need to remember that. That's really important.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you said that, because we're not even talking about like the challenge of actually explaining all this, like whichever model you do decide. Like it's just inherently easier. And again, this speaks to why it's so prevalent. If I'm buying something from you and I'm not 100% clear on what I'm going to get in
Mm-hmm.
return, which if it's I'm paying for 20 hours at $200 an hour, I know
Mm-hmm.
exactly what I'm going to get, right?
Mm-hmm. Or at least you
Versus,
should. And if you don't, that's a problem. That's a different problem.
right, versus a points menu, right,
Mm-hmm.
is heading towards value, but it's still clear. It
Mm-hmm.
clarifies what I'm going to get and what I can get with these different points. Once we get to value based, like completely, now it's a different explanation that doesn't always, it's harder for people to buy into. It can be harder to get approvals.
Mm-hmm.
If the CFO is not in the conversation hearing all this, and they don't see some kind of hourly breakdown like black and white, this is the transaction, right? it's
Mm-hmm.
it's harder, so you've got to put that person in the place to explain that to them and give them tools to do that. But I think this would be a good topic to dig into those three different specifically next week,
Mm-hmm.
because this, and this is where I tie it into mapping,
Mm-hmm.
this is why journey mapping and internal process maps are so important. Like, if you don't know how your team and how the customers and how the buyers are interacting with you, and when they are, you don't know what you can
Mm-hmm.
automate, you don't know how much time is being spent. You really, I mean, this is where most businesses I've seen, you can have a crystal clear understanding of the production side of the business, because it is all black and white, ones and zeros. Component A plus component B equals
Mm-hmm.
component C,
Mm-hmm.
always, right? On the front end of the business, that's not how human behavior works on either side of the internal external equation. So we just haven't, we've tried to avoid it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's just, we got to sell 100 units. So we've got this many salespeople. We've got this many regions across the country. You're all
Mm-hmm.
responsible for 20. We don't
Mm-hmm.
know if 20 is even viable in this region of the country, but that's how it works.
That's what
So
it's
we start
designed
to
for.
apply all
Right.
these, subjective boundaries, because we've got to measure something,
Mm-hmm.
right? But these maps that we're talking about, these journey maps and process maps, this is what we're talking about when we say building this into HubSpot, and HubSpot can
Mm-hmm.
help with this. But if so often, especially with pricing, and then, like, maybe we'll get to CPQs someday, like, people are not ready for CPQs, like the whole
Mm-hmm.
structure of how they sell.
Mm-hmm.
They're often not ready for CPQ. They think they need it. But then you get into these different strategies,
Mm-hmm.
and a CPQ is meant to be a system where it understands the input so you can have the outputs that you want. If
Mm-hmm.
you don't even understand your own inputs and outputs, because it always happens gradually differently throughout every sales process,
It's not going
then
to
a
evolve.
CPQ
It's
is
not
not
going
going
to
to work
scale.
for you,
Right.
right? Like, and so, yeah, I love this topic, and a
Yeah.
lot of people need help with it. And I think it'll be great to, you know, get into some more detail next week.
Yeah. I agree. I think we can very easily turn this into a theme and dive into it and hopefully help all you who might be having conversations, questions about it. Just go into it, and if there's anything that you want to dive in more or share thoughts or expertise on, like, please share that with us, because we would love to address these things head on, instead of, well, not head on, but address them from the perspective that is coming from you, not necessarily from where our experience is. Because again, like, we want to practice what we preach here. We want to build this on behalf of the customer, not what we think is the case. That's the whole concept. But
Yes. And
yeah.
that's, so as you think about, your different offerings, whether you're starting up new, I know this is definitely on your mind.
Mm-hmm.
But even as you understand that that time based and cost plus model is kind of breaking in half right now,
Mm-hmm.
for you, and you might not know how to move towards value based. Uh, Kind of take a quick look at your offerings,
Mm-hmm.
maybe find some opportunities, and let's grow. Have a
Mm-hmm.
great week, everybody.
Yep. Take care, all.